On the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, between the mountains of Lebanon and the open sea, a civilization rose without becoming a single empire. The people later called the Phoenicians did not rule the ancient world through one capital, one army, or one king. Their power moved differently. It traveled by ship, by contract, by cargo, and by reputation. From coastal cities such as Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, they built a maritime world that reached Cyprus, North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula. They connected older centers like Egypt and Mesopotamia with emerging Mediterranean societies, especially Greece. Their influence was commercial, cultural, and technological. To understand Phoenicia, we have to look not for borders on a map, but for routes across the sea. The Phoenicians did not suddenly appear after the collapse of the Bronze Age. They developed directly from the older Canaanite world of the Levant. Around 1200 BC, many eastern Mediterranean kingdoms suffered disruption, destruction, or decline. Yet along parts of the Levantine coast, cultural traditions continued with relatively little interruption. The people maintained related languages, religious practices, urban customs, and craft traditions. They often called themselves Canaanites and referred to their land as Canaan. The word Phoenicia was a Greek outside name, not the title of a unified native nation. Modern historians therefore see the sharp division between Canaanites and Phoenicians as partly artificial. Phoenicia was essentially the coastal Canaanite world reshaped by Iron Age trade and seafaring. Geography made Phoenicia unusual. Its cities occupied a narrow coastal strip, with mountains rising close behind them and the Mediterranean opening in front. This limited expansion inland, but it encouraged movement outward. The land could not easily support a vast territorial empire, so the sea became the natural path to wealth and influence. Lebanon's forests provided valuable timber, especially cedar, which was prized for temples, palaces, and ships. Good harbors allowed coastal cities to serve as trading hubs. Phoenician geography was not simply a backdrop, it shaped their entire strategy. They turned constraint into advantage. Where other powers measured strength by farmland and armies, Phoenician cities measured it by ships, ports, skilled craftsmen, and access to distant markets. Phoenicia was made up of independent city-states rather than one centralized kingdom. Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre were among the most important. Each city had its own political life, rulers, temples, alliances, and commercial interests. They shared broad language and cultural traditions, but there is no clear evidence that they thought of themselves as one nation in the modern sense. Kingship was common, yet powerful merchant families probably influenced policy because trade was the basis of prosperity. This created a political structure suited to maritime commerce. Decisions were local, practical, and often tied to opportunity. A city could negotiate with empires, compete with neighboring ports, and sponsor distant ventures without needing a single Phoenician state to direct everything. The Phoenicians became famous above all as traders. Their merchants carried timber, metals, glassware, textiles, wine and oil, luxury goods, and one of antiquity's most prized products, purple dye. This dye, produced from murex sea snails, required enormous labor and skill. Because it was difficult to make, it became associated with wealth, status, and royalty. But Phoenician trade was about more than valuable objects. It required knowledge, winds, currents, coastlines, languages, local rulers, weights, measures, and safe anchorages. A successful merchant needed information as much as cargo. Over centuries, Phoenician sailors transformed the Mediterranean from a dangerous barrier into a working commercial highway, linking societies that otherwise might have remained far more separate. Their maritime network expanded across much of the Mediterranean. Phoenician ships reached Cyprus, the Aegean, North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, southern France, and Spain. Some sites were temporary trading stations, while others became permanent colonies. These settlements were usually chosen for strategic reasons: a good harbor, access to metals, a useful position along a route, or proximity to local markets. Phoenician expansion was not always conquest in the later imperial sense. Often, it was about creating access and continuity. A chain of ports allowed ships to move farther, trade more safely, and maintain relationships across distance. In this way, Phoenician influence spread without requiring one army to occupy the whole Mediterranean. The greatest Phoenician colony was Carthage, founded in North Africa. At first, it belonged to the wider Phoenician commercial world, but over time it grew into a major power of its own. By the 7th century BC, Carthage had become one of the most important cities in the western Mediterranean. It controlled trade, founded or influenced settlements, and competed for resources and routes. Carthage shows how Phoenician expansion could generate new centers of power far from the original Levantine coast. Even when the older cities of Phoenicia came under the pressure of Eastern empires, Carthage preserved and transformed Phoenician traditions in the West. The later Roman destruction of Carthage ended a great power, but not the wider legacy it represented. Phoenician cities flourished especially in the early 1st millennium BC, but they lived near powerful imperial neighbors. The Neo-Assyrian Empire expanded into the Levant, followed by other great powers such as the Babylonians and the Achaemenid Persians. Phoenician cities often survived through negotiation. They paid tribute, supplied ships, and adjusted to imperial demands while trying to preserve local autonomy. Their expertise made them valuable. Empires that wanted naval power, Mediterranean access, or luxury trade needed Phoenician sailors and merchants. This gave the cities a form of leverage even when they lost political freedom. Their history is therefore not a simple story of independence or conquest, but of adaptation under pressure. For a long time, the Phoenicians seemed like a lost civilization. The reason was not that they were unimportant, but that few native historical narratives survived. Much of what later people knew came from outsiders, including Greek, Roman, and biblical writers. Those sources preserved valuable information, but they also carried bias and misunderstanding. The picture changed as inscriptions were discovered and studied from the 17th and 18th centuries onward. Thousands of Phoenician and Punic inscriptions revealed names, dedications, religious formulas, titles, and traces of civic life. Archaeology added another layer through harbors, temples, tombs, workshops, and traded objects. Phoenicia became visible again not as one grand archive, but as scattered evidence spread across the Mediterranean. The most enduring Phoenician legacy was the alphabet. Their writing system developed from earlier alphabetic traditions, including Proto-Sinaitic roots, and became one of the earliest verified alphabets. Its power was efficiency. Instead of hundreds of signs that required specialist training, an alphabet used a smaller set of symbols for sounds. This made writing easier to adapt for trade, administration, labeling, contracts, and communication. As Phoenician merchants moved, their script moved with them. The Greeks adopted and modified it, adding clearer vowel notation. From Greek came the Latin alphabet, used across much of the modern world, and the Cyrillic alphabet used in many Slavic languages. Phoenician writing also influenced other Near Eastern scripts. Its impact reaches into everyday typing today. Phoenician influence also reached industry, technology, and cultural exchange. Their shipbuilding and navigation helped make long-distance sea trade more regular. Their crafts, including glassmaking, metalwork, textiles, and dye production, helped shape elite consumption across the ancient world. Their colonies carried techniques, religious symbols, artistic styles, and commercial habits into new regions. They were not important simply because they invented things in isolation. Their role was often circulation. They moved goods, ideas, and practices between civilizations. That made them cultural transmitters. In the ancient Mediterranean, contact could change everything. Markets expanded, writing spread, artistic styles blended, and political ideas traveled. Phoenician ships were not just carrying cargo. They were carrying connections. Phoenicia challenges the way we think about ancient power. It was not a unified empire like Rome, nor a monumental river civilization like Egypt or Mesopotamia. Its strength was mobile, commercial, and distributed. It lived in harbor cities, merchant families, ship routes, colonies, inscriptions, and alphabets. The Phoenician cities eventually declined under the expansion of larger empires, yet their influence endured through Carthage, through Mediterranean commerce, and through writing systems that shaped later civilization. They were coastal Canaanites known to outsiders as Phoenicians, and their greatest achievement was turning the Mediterranean into a connected world. They proved that history is not only made by conquerors. Sometimes it is made by the people who build the routes everyone else follows. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.